Hi, I'm Dr. Mitch Harlan, and welcome to the Truth Talks podcast. In today's episode, I have a young lady that I became intrigued about through a mutual friend who happened to go into her book signing and said, "You need to get her on your show." And I really value this guy's opinion when it comes to people, when it comes to life. When it comes to everything. And so I'm like, all right, let me get a hold of her. So I want to introduce you right now to Bren Worthington. Bren, how are you?
Hi, Dr. Mitch. Doing good. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. So it's one thing when somebody tells me to come in to say, "Hey, you know what? I got a show. I think you might want to run this on your show. I think it's pretty good." And I said, "Okay, well, tell me a little bit about it." And it's he came in, walked in. Actually, it was kind of an interesting story. It's kind of a random walk in to your book signing, if I remember it exactly correct. And he's talking about narcissistic people, narcissism, so on and so forth. Him and I have had some conversations about different things in life about that. But then I see the title of the book. It's I Love You, or at least that's what it says on the top of the book. It says, "You're not fucking crazy." So we're going to unpack a whole lot of things in this episode. So start us out with the story that led you to write this book.
Okay, that's a really long story. Uh,
We'll do the quick version.
okay, I started this book probably 10 years ago. And I had started with the words subtle trauma because I had absolutely no words to explain what it was that I was going through. And that it was subtle and elusive and mysterious and confusing. And this was 10 years ago when we really weren't labeling narcissistic traits or narcissistic abuse. And I kept mislabeling it as I wasn't trying hard enough and I was dealing with unreasonable people, but I could make things better. So I started writing these words down going, okay, this is subtle trauma. This is maybe alcoholism. This is my not trying hard enough. This is maybe me enabling. And when I finally came to this recognition that it was narcissistic abuse and that I had a pattern of narcissistic abuse since my childhood, I vomited for 3 days. When I finally had the words to what it was that I was experiencing, it was a release. It was overwhelming. And I also found that I didn't have a good support group to understand what this was. It was scary.
You don't have to be around a lot of people for very long to realize that a lot of people been through something similar. Some label some things, some are just like, "Hey, you know what? That shit happened. I'm gonna move on to the next day." There's so many different ways that people process things chemically, but it sounds like for you, the labeling really helped.
Oh, I'm a lover of words. I've sat down as a child and read the dictionary. And I'm an investigator. I want to know why, and I want a word for it. And when you're raised in an abusive home, that's your normal. So I kept wondering why I kept getting myself in these situations with untrustworthy people and abusive people, because for all the work I had done, I thought I was a pretty normal person, but it was like, oh, yet again, I have this bad picker and I'm in an abusive situation again. And it's like, good God, I'm full of shame and anguish and embarrassment that I keep getting myself put in these situations.
Talk about the situations. Give us an idea of what we're looking at.
So when I went to college, I had come from a pretty abusive mother and father. And so my tolerance for, let's just say, bullshit
I love it. It's a word.
was pretty high. I was a very, I'd say, amenable child, always trying to make things better and not causing a problem at home. And I was very good at acquiescing. So when I was in my senior year in college, I was 3 credits away from graduating. And I had a professor say, hey, I'll give you this readings course. You're going to have to come into my office every day on Monday at 4 o'clock. And this was my only avenue to graduate. And he was, I'd say, a scholar, postgraduate, doctorate in psychology. And he started to say, hey, listen, you've got a lot of problems. Why don't I give you free therapy? I'm 20, 21 years old. And I'm like, free therapy? That sounds amazing. Sure. So he's giving me therapy and he's learning all about my triggers and my childhood. And I've never seen a therapist before. So I'm just opened up thinking I'm the luckiest girl in the world. And then all of a sudden he starts to shift, like I would get this punishment if I didn't show up on time. And then he started telling me that perhaps I was special. And now I know what that was. That was grooming. That was grooming for basically a one-person cult. And then he was 30 years my senior, not attractive and scary to me, but I was already used to scary and unattractive people. So I had this very high tolerance of going, I can get through this. As it turned out, he professed his love to me. He told me that I wasn't going to live if I wasn't with him. He raped me and locked me in a hotel room and brainwashed me. And it took me 5 years to get out of that situation. And I would label him a malignant, covert narcissist. And now I know that I wasn't the only woman that this happened to. And I've always felt a tremendous amount of guilt that I wasn't able to tell my story then to protect other women that were going to encounter him. And that, again, is another reason why I wrote this book, because I feel like if I could have given some identifiers and red flags and checklists to other women, maybe they wouldn't get stuck in this type of situation. And I also want to include men in this. I think that men experience narcissistic abuse as much as women. Most recently, when I was at that book reading that you talked about with our mutual friend, I had come to the realization that my audience was 50% men. And I went, okay, this is clearly a woman's issue, but this also is a man's issue, because both male and female narcissists have children, and those would be their sons. And both men and women suffer from the abuse of having a narcissistic boss.
What do you say to somebody like me that says, you have a reason growing up that way, and then for this thing to happen, why are you putting so much guilt on yourself when, again, you were kind of conditioned to fall into that process naturally?
Because I always like to believe that I'm strong. And if I can have a positive impact or be of support to someone else, that just lights me up.
Is my thinking wrong? Do you put more guilt on you than I would put guilt on you? I could totally, the sentence, the statement in the story makes sense to me. So where does all the guilt come from on your end? Is it because you were in it?
Probably I think one of the indicators of experiencing narcissistic abuse is there's a lot of guilt and shame. Think to yourself, why wasn't I smarter? Why didn't I see what was coming down the path? And of course you can't. And I write a lot about self-compassion in the book and self-forgiveness. Like, the first person I needed to forgive was myself. I didn't know any better. But it took me 30 years to write this book. That happened when I was 21. I'm 52.
So when you write a book like this, you write the book, how therapeutic was writing the book for you?
I get that question a lot. I would say not very, in that I spent 20 years in therapy, and doing all kinds of, yoga retreats and really trying to discover who I am and what my natural talents are. And when this book came to me, it just came and I wrote it in a few months. It was just bam, I finally have the words for it. Now, the editing process took a lot longer. I don't want to make people think that writing a book is easy, but I'd been writing the notes for this book for 8 years. But when I really put it together, it was so fast. And it was like, wow, this felt like a purpose.
Was it journaling in a way?
A little bit. There's a lot of humor in the book because this is a really heavy topic, right? We're talking childhood abuse, child neglect, rape, you name it. This is a hard read. So I wrote the first part in a fairy tale format, and it starts off with once upon a time in a land far, far away from sanity, there was the house of horrors, right? And I wanted people to get a little giggle out of it. So I really went into this personality of being very conscious to who my reader is. And I don't want to re-traumatize my reader. I want to give them a message of, yeah, this stuff happens in life, but we do have the ability to move on and live a peaceful, content life that's full of joy. And, the good times are going to happen and the bad times are going to happen, and they're both going to end.
I'm glad you said that, because here's where I want to take that sentence, because this is something that weighs on my mind all the time. I treated you differently knowing the story. I assume most people do. Narcissistic behavior starts with a lie and then into control, right? And it's always based on the chemistry of how someone reacts to you and how you react back to them. How does one get past that idea that, are you really getting the truth from the other person if they know this story? Or how do you heal past a way where now you can be in any environment and you're not consciously on the edge of deciding whether someone's trying to manipulate you or not?
Oh, that's great. I like that question. Thank you. So over the years, I've really learned how to trust my gut. And when my intuition, I call my gut my intuition, and my head is in alignment, I feel good. And I use my feelings as a barometer of what I can trust, situations or people. So if I feel at ease, that's okay. I'll lean in a bit more. If things aren't feeling so great and my stomach's starting to get tangled and I'm getting confused, well, that's probably not a good situation for me to be in. And I've really learned how to trust my own instincts, because when I was a child, I was taught how to override those primal instincts. And I know I'd shared with you something that my dad used to do to me as a child, which was we had this banister railing, and he would hold me over the railing, and I would just scream and cry because it looked like my death below. And he would say, I'm not bringing you into safety until you stop crying. And then he would bring me in. So as a child, I learned how to not trust my intuition and how to override fear. Those are not skills children should have.
Right.
So to answer your question, I guess, is I really have learned how to trust myself, and I'm going to make mistakes. I'm not narcissist proof or bad person proof, but I feel pretty confident that the world is good and most people are good. And I don't want to live a life that in fear.
Which is always interesting when I see a book like this, or I start talking to somebody. I mean, are we trying to identify what a narcissist is, or are we trying to identify why we fall for it? What's the theme?
Well, I think that you absolutely have to identify what a narcissist is. And a narcissist, we all have narcissistic traits, right? So it's on a spectrum. And most of us fall in about 85 to 90% of healthy narcissism. It's when it reaches this tipping point of narcissistic traits where they have a lack of empathy and they feel like they need to be the center of attention. And a narcissist believes that the rules and the laws do not apply to them, period.
This is exactly why I wanted to bring you on the show. That's the best statement ever, right? Because when people start to talk about these topics, or you use a label or you use a word, it's all or none. And that's what chaps my ass on a lot of things. We are all narcissistic in some regard. And I appreciate you saying that there's a certain level of healthy narcissism in the world, because that is truly human behavior. Whether we're setting up a pathway, we want somebody to feel a certain way about us, it is all the same. And so I think people get extremely confused when they read the definition of it, and then they say, that's him or that's her. You see it in relationships, you see it in business, you see it everywhere. And then the fact is, there is a healthy level of narcissism. So thanks for pointing that out. And I hope people really gather that.
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't loosely use that word to define someone. I would really have to know them and have a better understanding. I don't think it's great to label people. If it's a victim or a narcissist, I think we really need to take time to get to know a person before we label them. And in writing my book, what I had found that was out there was this spotlight on narcissists, right? They have so many names. They're covert, malignant, you name it. And I go, why is all the attention on the narcissist? Why? They're basically 5% of the population. So let's say 1 out of 200 people. Now, if one narcissist affects 4 people, that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so in my book, I say, hey, why don't we just get better at identifying it and understand why we're attracted to it and pivot? Because I do believe that our most precious commodity is time. And if we waste our time trying to change someone who's not going to change, well, that's on us. That's on us. And if we build a tolerance to accept behavior that is cruel or lack of empathy or going above and beyond the law, well, that's on us too. So I say, let's take the spotlight off of the narcissist and put it on ourselves.
So give me your best definition of a narcissist. That's unhealthy.
It's unhealthy. I'll go to the extreme first. How about that? So
Perfect.
I would say any serial killer is a narcissist, a malignant narcissist. They have no empathy and they feel something when they hurt another human being. Now that's at the most extreme, but that's a good place to start. And then you go to someone who willingly hurts another person physically. So a beating of someone and where they feel joy from that, right? So they're experiencing an emotion due to an act of lack of empathy. A narcissist would love any type of adoration, be it good or bad. They have no problems lying to you, looking you straight in the eyes. And I know we've experienced this in the politics. They look you straight in the eyes and they are so convinced that they're right that you believe them, but they're blatantly lying because they do not believe that the laws or rules are for them. So a narcissist could be your mother, brother, lover, neighbor. It could be anybody. But that little 10% degree on the spectrum is something to look for, because we're not running into, serial killers every day of the week.
You tapped into something there that kind of brought up a thing. When we talk about politics, right? This is something that, oh God, it gets me going like nobody's business. When somebody looks at you, blatantly lies, knowing that it's a lie, we would label that narcissistic. We just did, right? And it makes sense. Follows along the pathway. But when the opposing side does the exact same thing and they can't see it, that's pathological to me. It's extremely pathological. So when you said, 2 and 5 or 2 and 200 or whatever, 5%, whatever we're talking about. But if that person continues to hurt 4, that person continues to hurt 4, right? If you do simple data points or simple math, you realize that there's half the population out there that probably has some really skewed views of narcissistic behavior types, and it only continues to perpetuate the longer that we tolerate it, right? It's interesting. And we think sometimes narcissism is just based on how it affects us personally, but not how it actually affects a country.
I mean, that's a really good statement. And
Let's write a book. The world's fucking crazy. Let's write a book called The World's Fucking Crazy.
well, I always say, how do we reach like a 70% medium of what's reliable and trustworthy? Because everybody makes mistakes. It's just a human thing to do, to make mistakes. But if you're knowingly and, getting joy out of causing misery, that's a big indicator of, narcissistic traits.
I'm going to give you a scenario, and then I'll have you comment on it. I have a friend of mine who he literally hates when his wife goes out with girlfriends and they're drinking it up and partying, whatever they're going to do, right? When there's this control thing, obviously this word comes up in her language, narcissistic, and she'll still go, but it's a problem and it's an issue. Whereas she's even said to my wife, I don't know, why doesn't he have a problem at all with that? Now, I'm going to follow this up with a caveat of sometimes does it make her say, why don't you care? Do you see how these get real confusing after a bit? Like it can go from one way to completely the other, and people lose their mind very quickly and their chemistry gets distorted. So give me your rhetoric on that.
That's good. Well, I'll go to why don't you care? I'd ask, well, what would you make? Why would you say that? Because that's a very confusing question. If someone were to say that to me, why don't you care? And I guess I would say, what is it about me that makes you think I don't care? Care that maybe you're out having a good time and living your life and being with your friends. I care that you do that, because that makes you a fuller person to come home to me. And then I get the benefits of you experiencing different things. That's the way I see caring. So I think that allowing, or not even allowing, being generous, knowing that a human being needs many different types of relationships, and girlfriends are very important to a woman, just as guy friends are very important to men. And I've always seen relationships thrive better when they don't have the same exact hobbies, and they can come back together and talk about their interests instead of being carbon copies of each other.
This is where I like to take authors. I like to take, because there's a reason you wrote the book. A book just doesn't get done unless there's something behind it, right? It's either you want to teach something, you want to get out a story. And what I love most about doing these things is not necessarily going down the book, but I love real life scenarios. And when you do a real life scenario, there's some lady right now sitting in her house, or not right now, but when we air this, she's sitting in her house. Her husband's having these issues with her going out or what have you. And we're writing this book that may be technical, maybe some other thing, but they may not be able to put it into a contextual, this is my life. And so telling these stories, I think, are really, really super important. Like, the dad holding the kid over the rail. Like, to me, that's pathological, right? Like that, I can't rationalize any reason why that would be normal. Like it doesn't even register as that. But the realization is people do that shit, right? And part of narcissism, and this is kind of another area I wanted to take you down to, it seems or appears to me that a lot of it starts with control. So talk about control, because there's subtle controls. I think that him not wanting her to go out and hang out with a friend, I think that's control. I think that's narcissistic behavior, in my opinion.
I would say not wanting your partner to go out and enjoy themselves is a narcissistic trait for sure. I would be hesitant to say they're a narcissist, but if you could say this to the person and say, hey, listen, this is a personality trait that I can't deal with. This could be a deal breaker, because this is stifling my personal growth if I can't hang out with my girlfriends. And if they get angry about that, that's a red flag. That's a red flag. I know when I was with the professor, I wasn't allowed to do anything. I mean, he took the car, and I was basically in his control. And, he was like, this is the extreme. He was threatening my life. And he was just so afraid that if I went out into the real world, that I would leave him and he would lose his control. So I guess if we go back to your story of your friend, I'm guessing that man might be afraid he's going to lose some kind of control.
So when we label things like narcissists, but yet I bring on the author of the book, right? Are we scared to label things because we're scared to push a boundary? We're scared to say something like, I think he's a total narcissist. I got no problem telling him that.
Yeah.
You wrote the book. I mean, people are listening to this stuff. They need to understand where these traits start to lead to. And how many traits does it take before you label them a narcissist?
Yeah. Well, there's probably 100 traits, right? So if so I'd call it the red flag, right? So there's emotional control, there is financial control, there is control, sexual control, there is someone looking in on your emails, your privacy, your journals. I mean, all of those are red flags. If someone's trying to control you, to control your behavior and who you are and stifle your ability to be in the world, that's a very high narcissistic trait. And I personally would run, not walk.
And so there's other subtleties, though, that I want to talk about. Some of them are like this. Hey, I'm going to go out with my girlfriends tonight. Oh, shoot. You know what? I had planned to go to a movie with you tonight. So people try and show their narcissism as love, right? You agree?
Yeah, they will smother you. They call it, there's also another term called love bombing. And that's a huge red flag. So if someone comes up to you and says, I just met you and it feels like we've known each other in a past life. And I know that we were meant to be, and let's take a vacation next week. And, it just gets real syrupy, right? And I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I already love you. Run, run.
Yeah, that used to work in the bar in the 90s, though. It really did.
It's scary stuff it's scary stuff, I would say, for both men and women. If someone's saying to you, I don't know what it is, I'm in love with you, and they don't know who you are, they are idealizing what they think you are. And when you turn out not to be what they think you are, you're in trouble.
This is why I think people get trapped in these narcissistic relationships because they don't think deep enough at all.
Well, for me, I'd bought into the fantasy, of course, the fantasy that I had created as a child, that someone was going to save me from my misery. And I was going to find someone, marry someone, and have the white picket fence and live happily ever after. That is extremely naive. That was a fairy tale and something that was created out of Walt Disney, honestly. I was not taking any kind of accountability for my own personal growth as an individual. I was wanting to enmesh. I was wanting to be a codependent so that I didn't have to look at my ugly life alone. And I wanted to just pretend that none of that had happened to me and, live happily ever after. My prince is saving me. And that didn't happen. I continued the same pattern over and over again until I learned the lesson, which was I have to stand on my own 2 feet. And I'm not going to be a good partner for anybody until I've learned how to stand on my own 2 feet and take accountability for my behaviors and accept that I had a really, and I'll curse here, fucked up childhood. And that I needed to look at that childhood and go, yeah, that was bad. That did happen. But that doesn't need to identify who I am today. And I don't have to repeat that type of abuse to my own children.
I love it, Bren. This is why I wanted to run your story. And we're actually very cautious in who we bring on the show. A lot of people do for clicks, for ratings, and so the producer Chad and I, a long time ago, we decided we're going to do a thing. It's called Truth Talks, and that's why we did this, right? And I do believe you came out on the other side of this, and I do believe most people don't. I think it's overwhelmingly the majority do not. They fall into a certain behavior pattern and they'll let that go for the end of time. So hold up your book. We want to show everybody where they can actually come and read your book. That's the first one that I really like. You're not fucking crazy. However, you had to change it just a little bit because people couldn't handle the word fucking crazy, right?
Even with the heart on the
even with the heart. I think you're doing a great thing. I always say this, and I mean this, if anybody's listening, you don't always have to agree. As a matter of fact, the majority of the time when you don't agree with something is when you're actually growing. It makes you think about things from a completely different perspective. And I love having these conversations. I do resonate with you a lot because you did come out on the other side. I don't feel any victimhood in you. It's like, this shit happened. I had to address it. I had to take responsibility. You hit a lot of key words that I like because I think that life is going to kick you in the ass every single day. And if you don't have a skill set that says, I'm going to take my responsibility for why the world's kicking me in the ass, it's going to continue to kick you, and it's going to kick you real hard. And I appreciate you coming on and bearing your soul like this. This is, these aren't easy to do, saying your dad's holding you over a rail. That's not easy. But for that person who did get held over the rail and they've never gotten past it, and they're in a life of drugs or alcohol or continuing shitty relationships and so on and so forth, it's super important, super important. And I applaud you for that. I hate the word courageous. I don't even know what that means. I don't like the word brave. I don't even know what that means. But the word that I like to use is I'm grateful. I'm grateful that you're willing to come on and kind of expose that and share that. And I really want to encourage all of our listeners to read your book. Whether they agree with some of it, all of it, none of it, doesn't matter. You got a completely different perspective. So thanks for coming on here, doing what you do. Don't stop there. Write another one, right? And there's plenty of books to be written. And I always say the greatest expert in any topic is the one that's been through it. And you've been through it, you come out. So again, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the opportunity to share my experience with you. I really am grateful.
This won't be the end. I think you should invite me to your next book signing and let me rail off on all of these people. And then they'll buy your book as they say, well, this is what a narcissist actually looks like.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. See, it all works out. Yeah. And where can people get your book?
Oh, the book is for sale on Amazon and at some clothing stores in Colorado, Common Era, and some local bookstores. We're just beginning with getting them out into the public. I am doing a reading on November 10th at the Niwot bookstore. So I'm providing wine and we're going to have a really good time.
Ooh, wine. Yeah, boy, talk about bringing out all your behaviors, right? Just get everybody blasted on a little bit of wine. It always works out great for our conversation. So actually, it makes the best shows.
I thought let's have a conversation. I've had some experiences. I don't like to use the word. I'm not an authority. I just am willing to share. And I truly believe that I was as sick as my secrets. And when I had started to divulge my secrets to others and even to myself, I got a lot healthier.
I actually had that written down. I was going to bring that up. It's one of my favorite lines, actually, and I'll just admit on camera so you can sue me later. I'm probably going to use that at some point. That is one of the greatest lines I've ever. You're only as sick as your secrets. I love it. That is phenomenal. Yeah, you did extremely well. So that's awesome. Let's stay in touch, though, because I have a lot more thought-provoking questions.
I would love that. Thank you very much.
All right. You take care, Bren.
Bye.
Bye-bye.